Hi, I'm Hannah Durden and you're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. We've mentioned home education quite a few times on the Outdoors Group podcast, so we thought it was high time we sit down and dedicate a whole episode to this topic. As a home educating parent myself, I was spoilt for choice of finding guests, but I'm very glad that Kate and Claire agreed to join me. Together we've got 10 children spanning an age from 6 to 22, of which all but one have never been to school, so hopefully we are reasonably qualified and experienced to give a bit of an overview of what home education is, why we think it works and what it can look like for different families. So thanks for joining me today, you two.
Hello.
So we'll start with the most obvious question, just for people out there. What exactly is home education? How would you guys define it if someone asks?
Well, I think a common misconception is that it's just school at home, taught by a parent, but I think in my experience that's rarely the case. I think it's gives families the opportunity to explore subjects and interests of their children without the confines of the national curriculum, and it looks really different from family to family. Some families are completely free rein and they let their children decide what they want to do and when they want to do it, and others like ourselves enjoy a bit of a mixture of project-based or interest-based learning alongside forest school and educational visits and learning with their home ed families and home ed social groups. So in our family also we've just tended to focus on academic work as the children have got a bit older.
I think that's the same for us, that it's changed over the years between sort of more structured approach and more sort of outdoor play-based learning at different times depending on the children's ages. But I see home education as the freedom to learn outside of a restrictive curriculum.
Oh, we should probably add, because I realise looking at the questions, I've not put it in, one of the questions people often ask is it legal? Which obviously it is, otherwise we wouldn't be publishing a podcast about it. So I can't remember what the Education Act is it 96? I don't know, from the 90s. Anyway, so it's in there just for people who are listening that you can choose where your children is educated, whether that's at school or otherwise. So yes, totally legal. I just thought I'd quickly get that out of the way.
And at the moment there aren't any restrictions on that, although your local authority depending on your postcode, may be more or less involved. But we're very lucky in Devon to have quite a supportive local authority and be quite able to choose the best route for our children.
Yeah, absolutely. So following on from those, one of the questions that I've been asked a lot, and I'm sure you guys have as well, is why do people choose to educate their children at home? So I guess why have you guys chosen not to send them to school, and also maybe just experience of other families, why they've made that choice?
Okay, so I first started looking into home education when it became clear that my son, who is a teenager now, was autistic. As a toddler, we realised that school wasn't going to suit him and it wasn't going to be the best pathway for his learning. And so after a couple of years of home educating him, we were just enjoying it so much and had realised all the benefits of it, so it just made sense to carry on with the others.
Yeah. What about you, Kate?
Well, I think for us, we wanted the freedom of learning at the children's pace without the pressure to hit specific learning targets at specific times, and we wanted to enjoy the freedom of exploring the children's interests and opportunity to spend more time together as a family. Really, we just like the idea of not being confined by the school system. But I think, I know lots of different people who home educate for lots of different reasons, and I know that some families put their children into the school system and then they find it doesn't suit their child and they decide to educate them at home. So, or they find they don't get the support through the school system that their child needs. So for some people it's sort of more ideological, and for others it's just more of a necessity, I think.
And I think it's also important to ask why people put their children into schools as well, because school's actually quite a recent experiment, really, in the history of humankind. It's only been sort of a formal schooling system for a relatively short time. And I think it's interesting to ask whether we just do things because everybody else has been doing them in our families, for example. So I wouldn't want to, I think the school system is great for some children, and my husband works in the education system, but I feel that it hasn't maybe changed as much as things like business and the way that we do research with the advent of the internet and things like that. And we wanted to have the benefits of all of those things in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, Kate. So I think it's split, isn't it, between people that do it out of necessity, whether that's because they can't get their SEN needs met or they're taking them out for bullying, and then the people that do it for their ideological kind of side. But lots of different reasons, isn't there?
Yeah, loads of different reasons and loads of different types of people doing it. It's definitely not just one sort of genre of family. Just meet all sorts.
Yeah, definitely, all walks of life. So in reality, how does it work? I mean, obviously you mentioned earlier, Claire, that it's changed over the years, and me and Kate were talking about this earlier today, that it's never static, is it? You never find one thing that will work for the next 10 years. But if you guys could tell me how it works for you, as well as how you've seen it working for other families, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's really changed and adapted over the years for us. And when I had two sort of young children who were fairly close together in age, we used to do lots of stuff at home, lots of meeting up with other families, lots of trips out, educational trips and museums and castles, and then we used to go to lots of homemade groups. So it was really, when the children were younger, it was a lot more free flow, learning through life, and we used to do some projects at home. We used to sort of make lap books, which were a bit like scrapbooks about what we've learned about, and sort of the basics I taught my two youngest at home, and then all the normal extracurricular activities that other children do, like swimming and gym and everything else, and then we've always regularly met up with your family, Hannah, and done learning together, and that's always been quite a big part of our home ed week. But as the children have got older, that has changed, and our weeks have become a bit more structured. We do a bit more tutor-led lessons. We do more online lessons, and my eldest is 14, and so now we're looking at GCSEs for her, and that's changed the way that our home ed looks as well. So, bit of a mix of structured and unstructured. I know other families that do like more school at home, a more sort of school at home type approach, and it's worked for them. And I know families that have let their children, completely lead the way that they learn, and that's worked for them as well. But it does seem interesting that in most cases, most of the families that I've met, whichever approach they've taken, the children have more or less thrived and gone on into higher education, whichever route they've sort of gone. So that's always been really interesting.
Yeah, I think we've done a sort of combination depending on the child and their interests at the time. Like Kate, when they were younger, we did a lot of trips, we did a lot of meeting up with other families, which we still do now, but we probably spend more time at home now that two of mine are doing GCSE level qualifications. I think it's been really nice to be able to follow their natural interests. So one of mine is very, very interested in music and doesn't really want to do anything else. So pretty much everything that he does is linked to music in some way, or to his goal of going to music college. So he's, as an example, reluctantly doing some GCSEs that he's not overly interested in, but he really wants to reach college. So it's a sort of compromise approach in that way, but generally led by his interest in music. And yeah, some people have a much more kind of academic approach in which they're doing a lot of qualifications early with specific goals in mind, and others are working to a very kind of general aim of maybe working towards self-employment in some area and not wanting to take any qualifications at all. It's always really interesting to see what people choose.
I think I was going to say what's interesting is both you said about, well, I don't know if you said it, Claire, but I know it's true. I think lots of home ed families do tend to start not thinking about education until older, like more like 7 or 8. Would you guys agree that most people have done that? I mean, that's linked to a lot of educational kind of theories and philosophies, isn't it, about when's the best age to start, like Steiner, Montessori, all those ones say 7's kind of when to start, isn't it? So
well, I think it's interesting because we've all got sort of at least 3 children, haven't we? And it's been interesting, like how my approach has changed from the eldest to the youngest, and I'm definitely a lot more laid back now with my youngest, who's 6, and you know, she's starting to express an interest in reading, and she's starting to want to learn. And of course, once they start to express the interest in wanting to do it, it's so much easier to do it rather than sort of pushing it on them before they're ready. And that is one of the things I really like about home ed. And I don't know whether it might be reassuring to some people as well that, you know, my 2 older children were both quite late readers, and I know that's always seemed, and I definitely worried about that, but actually they can both read, and they both, you know, enjoy reading, one of them more than the other. So yeah, that was something that I worried about on our journey, and I'm not really worried about that now with my youngest child.
Yeah, I saw a great post from Dr. Naomi Fisher the other day, and I can't remember exactly what her title is. I think she's an educational psychologist or researcher, but she talked about if your children's not in school, then their education tends to be mostly play-based until they're 9 or 10. So again, that's good, just something to put out there, because I think if you've got friends whose kids are in school and you see your kid doing a lot of playing and not much learning at 8, 9, then sometimes it's a bit like, oh, am I doing it wrong? But actually, if left to their own devices, it's kind of just a natural development, isn't it, to be player, then, as you say, to kind of start the education a bit later.
Watching your children play and having the space to the time to play and not be interrupted from their play is actually, I suppose I could put that in my highlights actually of home ed, because you know, it's really nice. I've always tried not to interrupt play if possible with something else that they don't, because they're not going to be open to doing something if they're totally immersed in a game. And yeah, the imaginative play that I've watched my kids do has been really, really joyful actually through the years. So I hadn't planned to mention that, but it's definitely worth saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned earlier, some people do kind of school at home, like you can buy curriculums and stuff, and some people do completely like child-led, and so you've got quite everything in between, haven't you? Which is it's just good to know that there's not one way of doing it. So I guess maybe we'll do that later. I was just thinking about advice for people, but I think we'll go on to that a bit later maybe. So I think let's talk maybe instead about some of the questions, some of the commonly asked questions. And I kind of mentioned legalities earlier, which was a nice, quick, easy one to answer. Yes, totally legal. And also, if you do want more advice on what your responsibilities are as a home educating parent, there's some great resources out there, like the Home Education Advisory Service, or what's the other one? Education Otherwise. So they're good starting points. But the biggest one is definitely when we're asked about socialisation, right? So people seem to think that if your child's not in school with 30 peers 5 days a week, they're somehow going to miss out on a social side of things. So how do you guys respond to that? How have you responded over the years?
I've found it really interesting that the children have learned to socialise with people of all ages, and we're all different, aren't we? Some of the children do enjoy connecting with adults more, and some find it easier to connect with children who are older than or younger than they are, whereas some will always gravitate towards children their own age. So it's been really interesting that they've had an opportunity to be friends with children right across the age spectrum, and to get to know lots of interesting and interested adults as well. We've had loads of really busy birthday parties. We've had loads of really close friends, and we have had experiences of being really close to a family and then them moving away, for example, which has been difficult for the children, but that can also obviously happen in schools. I think it's great that more people are home educating now. That's been great for us because there are more people around at the groups and things like that. So it was always a little bit tricky for teenagers in the past, but we're not finding that now. There seem to be quite a lot of opportunities for all of them to meet people. It's not been a problem for us at all. In fact, we've had much more trouble with socialisation with the one child who did go to school. But again, not related to the school.
I would say for most of our home ed journey, just socialisation hasn't really been a problem, and there's just been times as well where we were like booking time at home because we were just out and about. There were so many opportunities, and it has changed a bit since when we very first started. So my eldest is 14, nearly 15. There's much more available now. There are just amazing networks of home ed families that are coming together, and they're providing opportunities for their children to socialise and to learn together. And, you know, in our current weekly schedule, we attend 3 different home ed meetups with children of all different ages. Like Claire says, it's really nice actually to watch the children of different ages play together. And the older ones are always so kind and understanding and tolerant towards younger ones.
Yes.
Like consistently, that's always really nice. I found it a little bit trickier to facilitate. It is trickier to facilitate the children's friendships, I suppose, from the point of view that they rely on us to do it for them. They rely on the parents to get them together. But, you know, on the whole, I would say socialisation hasn't been a problem. And in my experience, the home ed children I've met are always really confident and engaging. So I think that's a good indicator of well-adjusted
children. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that geographic element is the one thing that sometimes is a hindrance, right? Because that's the only thing. When you home ed, you often come and drive to meet people, so sometimes that can be a challenge. But there's ways and means around it.
It must be different if you're living in the city, you know, in a busy city. Maybe that must be.
We all live reasonably rurally. Oh, that's a hard word to say. Rurally. What about exams and qualifications to access kind of further education? I've had a lot of people that have always said, well, I'd home ed till primary, but no, they need to go to secondary. So what do you guys how do you address, I mean, you both mentioned that you've got people at that stage, so how are you we've touched on it earlier, but how are you kind of addressing that?
Loads of people always seem, it's like one of the socialisation question, and this question
exams,
is one that people always lots of people ask it. They also ask if, I don't know if you've had this, people are saying, if you've got to do your SATs, the children got to do SATs. Like, actually, you don't have to do GCSEs, they're not compulsory, and you don't even have to follow the national curriculum if you don't want to. You've just got to provide a suitable education for your child. However, for us, I don't want to close off any opportunities for my children, and so we've always expected that we would work towards GCSEs, and my eldest daughter is working towards some GCSEs.
And how does that look like? Because obviously she's not in school going to GCSE classes, so... Well,
this is a new part of our home journey that we're just discovering. So for her, she has a tutor. She does one-on-one in-person tutor for one subject. She does some lessons online for other subjects. She's getting taught one GCSE by Hannah. And she is also attending a home ed hub, a local home ed hub, for English, and she's going to start
sessions
there. Small group sessions there. I didn't know that's how it would turn out, like that's how we would end up doing GCSEs, but I did always know that we would find a way to do them. I think some children are able to access programmes that are specifically designed for 14 to 16-year-olds in colleges. There is one sort of fairly, well, it's not local enough for us to access it, but there is one around here. And I think some children are going on and they're doing their GCSEs at college once they're 16. They're well
alongside their other courses.
Alongside their other courses, I think the thing is, from what I've seen as well from the families, is that once the children are in higher education, they've just the same as they've just got all the same opportunities as other kids that have gone via the school route. Yeah, that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I agree with similar. One of mine is doing some GCSEs and GCSE equivalents at the moment. We've been really interested to find there are some subjects like music and things like the technology subjects that are quite difficult to do outside of a school or an institution because of the coursework elements and that sort of thing. So we've found some alternatives online which are the same level qualification, but they're much more suited to home education. So they're doing much more self-directed study and research and sort of working on their own kind of areas of interest. I've got one doing one in music and one doing one in creative cookery, and that's been really interesting because it allows them to have a lot of ownership over what they're doing alongside the more traditional kind of maths and English GCSE curriculums that we're using. We're doing IGCSEs, the international GCSEs, because they are slightly more accessible again for students who aren't in schools. And one of mine is interested in an apprenticeship route in the future at the moment, although that might change. And one is keen on college, so we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I know that people have been to those kind of university fairs and spoken to universities who are always really happy to accept home-educated kids. I think anecdotally lots of them say that home-ed kids tend to have better kind of, I don't know how you put it,
Self-discipline?
Self-discipline, self-motivation. I know that my sister, who was home-educated, when she went to uni, was worried that it would set her back only having 5 GCSEs rather than 12. But when they heard that she'd been home-educated, they were like, no, that's fine, because we know that there's a certain level where you've had to motivate yourself to do that exam, right? Because your mum's not going to be quite as, I don't know, maybe we would nag as much as the teacher, but it's not the same. But yeah. So that's not a barrier for people, is it, accessing university?
It certainly doesn't seem to be, no.
So in terms of access, I guess also people want to think about the cost. Like it's most families are 2 parents working, even if one of them's only part-time, and that's definitely something that people have asked me is, how does it mean that one parent can't work, and how do you afford that, particularly at the moment with the cost of living crisis? Like, it is a privilege to be able to do. So I guess let's chat about that a little bit.
I agree with you that it is a privilege, and it is a really valid question. I've been very lucky that I've been able to work from home for all of my children's lives, mainly in the evenings and weekends. So that's worked well for us. But we know families who are taking a lot of different approaches to it, from families who world school, travelling all the time, moving around between different countries and working remotely, to families who run self-employed businesses, or families where the sort of childcare and education is shared amongst the adults in the family. Sometimes grandparents are involved, or friends come together to educate. I think most people find a way of doing it, but again, it's one of those things that looks different for everybody.
Yeah, I think that I think for most home ed parents, choosing to educate at home does mean some sort of financial sacrifice, and I think, well, lots of home ed parents I know work part-time, and that can work, and as the children get older, obviously that gets easier, that gets more of a possibility. I do know parents who successfully work full-time and home educate their older children. I know, same as Claire, I know some parents where they both work part-time, or one works full-time and one does all the educated. I think in couples, people are just making it work between them. Lots of jobs, are flexible, and you can work from home more now. So that's obviously good for home educating families. I know educating at home might not be an option for some families financially, and that would be difficult. But I know that there are some families as well that just feel like that they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
They're been let down by the system, and I think probably those families find a way to do it. Yeah.
I guess you can do it as cheaply or as expensively as you like, right? Like, a lot of the community groups, your cost to go is a couple of pounds to cover the hall hire. So, it doesn't have to be lots of expensive groups and things, does it? It can be.
And particularly now, I think there's more around than there ever has been before, because the numbers have increased. So.
Yeah. Before we move on to kind of a bit more about your experience, like for someone that's thinking about home educating but not sure about taking the dive, like what kind of advice or like how would you signpost them? Like, what would you kind of say to someone that's thinking about doing it? Like, where would you send them? Like, or would you just say jump in and do it?
I think I'd say go along to a home ed group or a parent led home ed group, which if you were to get in touch with them in advance and ask if that was okay, I think you would find that the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
And go along and talk to the parents that are doing it, because I think you'd be surprised how big the community is of home educating parents and how welcoming it is. I've always found it welcoming, and talk to people having first-hand experiences, because everyone is doing it slightly differently. And like I know myself, when we were making the decision felt agonising, but once we made the decision, it was such a relief, and it was there's a real feeling of freedom that came with that. And talk to the parents that are doing it, and you'll find someone that's going through the same thing that you went through. You'll find it encouraging, and that would be my advice.
I think the Facebook groups are really great as well. It's really interesting on the national Facebook groups and local groups, some of which are private, but a lot of them are open to discussing with people who are considering their options. And I think that's really a good way of finding out about different approaches as well.
And what's going on in your area, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always more going on locally than people expect.
Yeah.
And also, I would say you don't have to make a decision now about the next 10 years. So you make the decision that is right for you at the moment. And whether you decide to home educate for a year or 2 years or until children are 8 or whatever, and then reassess, it can be helpful to kind of break it down and just be making the decision for this period of time rather than forever. And it feels slightly less overwhelming then, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we did, actually.
Yeah, because there's lots of people, isn't there, I think, who think, 4 just seems very small to go to school 5 days a week. And then a lot of those, let's face it, do end up going, 5's still quite small, and 6 still, and then they've kind of eased into it, but it's been less scary than just going, right, that's it. But,
we initially delayed for a year, and it's been 11 years so far, and we're still delayed.
I've asked to talk about the benefits, but just before we do that, I think it's good to be realistic, and I don't want to paint a picture where it's all sunshine and roses and we spend all our time having these lovely child-led things, because obviously there is struggles to everything you do. So maybe a constructive way to talk about challenges that we might have faced or things that we found particularly challenging. And often I always think people say, I don't think I could be around my kids all day, but I don't think that's necessarily what I struggle with sometimes. Yeah, or what do you guys think? Just to kind of paint, before we go on to our highlights and benefits, just so we can paint a bit of a realistic picture.
When people used to say that to me, I remember when the children were younger and people used to say, I don't know, I think I could be around my kids all day. I used to think to myself, well, we've got a different rhythm and a bit of a different dynamic in our lives, and so it's not the same as when the children are in school. And I still think that, but I think that doesn't apply so much as the children get older. I think the biggest challenge probably is having a bit of time to yourself, a bit of time to a bit of adult thinking, not being interrupted all the time would be really really nice,
We're doing quite well right now. Half
Yeah,
an hour.
I know. It is amazing. How many children have we got in the house right now?
9 children in the house, and they've left us alone for half an hour.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges for me has been just having a bit of time to myself, and as time has gone on, finding the time to work has also been a challenge. Yeah. So I think those have been my biggest challenges.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. And also maybe having to split your time and energy amongst the children. So having home educating 3 of them at different stages means sort of always feeling that there's more that you could be doing with each one of them. So that often feels like a bit of a compromise, that they have to adapt to each other, but at least there's only 3 of them, not 30. Maybe it's fine.
I was going to say, actually, yeah, I think time, but maybe also like that kind of FOMO thing. Like, there's so much going on in Devon that I think sometimes you can overcommit yourself, and then that, I know it sounds like a really stupid negative to have, but sometimes you think, oh my goodness, there's too much to do. Like, and we are very lucky to have that as a problem, but yeah, you can be very, very busy. So I think it's quite
managing 3
time,
children's times tables, because when they're younger, you take them all. You all go to the same places, so you all go to the same groups, and so you're all around each other all the time. And then as they get older and they start to want to do, they've all got their own interests. That has become, like, that juggling act is difficult, and the amount of driving that you end up doing is difficult. Those are 2 things. But I suppose, again, that's it's always changing, isn't it? And you know, at some point in the future, my eldest is going to, not far away, my eldest will be at college, and then I'll just have 2 children to juggle, and that will be a change as well. So
yeah, that's a much better way of explaining it.
Yes, and I read this really lovely analogy which was talking about, I think it was just talking about parenthood in general, but it was talking about how you often have lots of balls juggling and you can drop them and stuff, and it was saying about it's working out which ball's made of glass and which one's made of plastic, and then just dropping the plastic ones. And I love that analogy, and I think that works in home ed. Like, sometimes it's dropping the things and going, oh, actually that doesn't really matter that much, and keep the glass ones in the air.
Yeah, I really like that.
But let's move on to the benefits then, because that's a lovely way to kind of round things up. Tell me about your highlights from your last kind of decade or so of home education, and the benefits for you guys.
When I saw that you were going to ask us this question, I was like, oh no, what are the... Because there are so many, and it's changed so much over the years. It's difficult to pick up. But for me, the benefits definitely outweigh all the challenges, any challenges. Getting to spend, we've had the opportunity to spend much more time with my mum and dad than we would have had otherwise, and we were able to see them more often and enjoy trips with them in term time that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And we've really enjoyed, and this seems like a small thing, but it's great having places like that when they're quiet, going places when they're quiet, having places to yourself is really enjoyable. We've done some really amazing history projects. We've listened to loads of audiobooks. We used to listen to so many, and the children, people compliment me on the kids' vocabulary and their intelligence and their knowledge, and that's such a compliment. That's such a compliment to me, because they've been around me so much, I suppose. And watching my eldest develop, she loves Latin, and she's really enthusiastic about translation. And who would have ever thought, when I was looking at her when she was 7, and she wouldn't sit down with me and learn, the basics, that she's comes enthusiastically to tell me all about something she's just translated from Latin. My middle daughter learns French, and her French teacher says she's got an amazing pronunciation, and I like to think that that's because she's not self-conscious. She can just be really free with that. And my little one just tags along at the moment, but it's particularly satisfying sometimes when one of the other girls sits down with her and starts to teach her maths or something. And I'm like, yeah, it's all right, I've got this. We're going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a really lovely one. I've really loved seeing my older ones reading to the younger ones, or teaching them guitar, or starting to show them how to do things that they couldn't otherwise do, or watching them cook together or something. I think that's, seeing them developing their own interests has just been really amazing to see how unique the paths are that they choose.
Yeah.
We've been really privileged to develop an outdoor learning community, which has been a really lovely...
Oh, thanks for the plug for the outdoors.
It's really a lovely community that's really helped us, particularly in COVID, when it was so difficult to socialise indoors in the times that we were allowed to meet up outdoors and have those really lovely connections. Kept us all going, really. That was brilliant. And we've also had some really amazing trips, I suppose. Learning wise, I've really enjoyed things like a trip to Hadrian's Wall that we did when we were looking at the Romans, and a trip to France when we were learning French, and just seeing learning becoming really relevant in the real world. I think not just looking at a textbook at home, but actually getting out there and seeing how it really mattered, or how it still matters. That's been really, really interesting for us. And also reading, as you said, Kate, that really, I still spend hours with my youngest reading everything. We're reading a series about dragons at the moment, which has got us both gripped, and I must have read Harry Potter more times than Stephen
Fry?
What's his name? Stephen Fry, who did the audiobooks. I feel like that's been one of my favourite things. We did a lot of thematic learning when the kids were younger as well, learning around the series of books that we were reading, and just spending hours and hours reading with them has been a real privilege.
Yeah, that's definitely a common theme, isn't it, in home ed families, is the love of books. And we are just about to finish, but I realised that both of you have obviously utilised the our home ed forest school groups over the years. So I just thought I'd quickly ask you about those. I mean, your eldest was there. Actually, both of your eldest were there for probably like most of their childhoods, weren't they?
A little bit of a break because of the COVID stuff.
Yeah, but more or less,
apart from that, yes. Many. I think I did work it out 7 years or something like that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, when my eldest stopped, I realised it because we'd gone to the toddler group that she'd been going for like 9 years. But when she went, actually, I need to do other things with my time. But what did yours like about the forest schools? I thought I'd better get a plug in there.
The forest school home ed groups were absolutely amazing for us. We did the family group for a long time all together, and that was great from when my youngest was about 6 weeks old. That was brilliant. And it just allowed them to build a community and to make friends and connect with other adults. My now nearly 15-year-old was very anxious about going to places without me for a while, or without another adult. But he built such positive relationships with the teachers at Forest School that he started out with trying one afternoon of the older home ed group, and came home immediately saying he wanted to do 2 full days, which he carried on doing for the next 6 years. So it's been amazing for him particularly, but for the others as well, just in terms of making friends, connecting with other people, and building their skills like cooperating and confidence and that sort of thing. It's been brilliant for us.
My eldest is the same age as Claire's, and it was amazing. What always amazed me, we'd go places and she would just know all this information about, everything around her. She can, tell me the names of all the trees, and she got great skills. She absolutely loved all of the activities that they had on offer. All the hands-on stuff, it really worked for her. All of mine have been to the forest school, and they've all really enjoyed it. So big up the forest school.
Thanks, guys. That was for Nick. Give him a plug. So thanks so much for your time. I feel like we could go on for hours. There's so much to talk about, but we'll wind up now. quit while we're ahead in terms of the kids. So I'm just going to quickly ask you guys these last 3 questions, just kind of quick fire, because it's a nice way to finish. So we'll start with, how do you relax?
Away from my children. For me, a brisk walk on my own, a good book, and chatting with friends. I really like the kids, actually. I like when we do the kids home ed social groups, because I get to go and talk to the home ed mums. I really enjoy that.
I think that's another real plus, actually, of home ed that we haven't really mentioned, becoming friends with whole families and kind of developing really strong relationships with other families has been, huge benefit.
Yeah.
I would say I relax definitely with reading, and also yoga. I'm a yoga teacher, so when I remember to do it for myself, it's really great.
And seeing as you both mentioned reading, what are you both reading right now?
I've just finished Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen.
Recommend?
And it's so good. It's so good. Everything. I love everything he's written. I would highly recommend him to anyone.
What about you?
I'm reading the Third Thursday Murder Club book, which I got for Christmas, and I do love them.
Richard Osman?
Yes, yeah. They're not particularly highbrow, but they're really well written and very funny.
A good escape. And finally, you've both kind of mentioned a little bit about the outdoors. Why do you like being outdoors? Why is it important to you?
Well, we moved to Devon from London to have the opportunity to be in beautiful places, and for the children to have the opportunity to enjoy the coast and to be away from screens and enjoy the fresh air. We try and get outdoors as much as we can, and we wouldn't be in this part of the country if it wasn't important to us.
Yeah, I think we're very, very lucky to live in such an amazing area. There's just an energy shift, isn't there, especially with children of all ages, really, but especially when they're small and it's so difficult to get out the door, and then as soon as you're out, the energy shifts and everything just feels easier.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Everything's easier outside, it feels like sometimes. Well, thank you so much for your time today, guys. Really enjoyed chatting to you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks again to Kate and to Claire for joining me to talk about home education. I really enjoyed talking to them, and I hope that you enjoyed listening and that it might have been useful to people out there that might be interested in finding out more about home education, either out of curiosity or for their own children. Thanks again for listening. Again, if you're enjoying the podcast, please do like it, subscribe, share it, rate it, do all the things that you need to do to mean that more people can find us. We would be so grateful. And if you come back in a fortnight, we've got a really, really fun episode where we've talked to lots of home educated children about how they find home education and the approach to learning that they take. And that's really fun. So do come back for that in a fortnight's time. And for now, thanks for listening.